Our next speaker is our keynote speaker, Jed Oseyran. Jed is Director of Global Center of Competence for Circular Economy in IBM. And we all know IBM as an expert in technical solutions. And now also IBM will help us to solve our challenges within circular economy. Jed, you live in the Netherlands, and I've also heard that in Netherlands you are the country that maybe have worked for a long time with these challenges, and you can provide solutions, and you're working together, both the technical solutions with the whole value chain. So welcome to Norway. We are glad that you came to have this presentation, and I look forward to hear you.
Thank you. Well, happy to be here actually in Norway, and I thought in the beginning, because I lived in Sweden for a year, about 10 years ago, that my poor Swedish will help me today, but it's not helping, so thank you, Anne, for the translations in the first presentation. So, I like the perspective that was given before, just with the speaker before me, because you saw the red color and the green color, and actually it's a bit also of an analogy for what's the situation now and why we created this center of competence at IBM ultimately, because you can look at it from both sides. There is a red card and there's a green card. So yes, I think we are all hearing about the challenges happening around climate change, resource scarcity, and I will touch upon them briefly, but I will try to look today more from the green card perspective, in the sense of what is the opportunity here. And that was actually one of the main reasons we started this, and why since 25 years actually at IBM we have a unit for reusing our assets worldwide. It's a $2 billion per year business with very healthy margins. So when I'm speaking around circular economy from the perspective of IBM and its direct environment, it's also just makes business sense. We make money out of it. It's smarter to design your products for being upgraded. It's a better protection for the investor who's buying a machine, a mainframe for a few million euros, to know that after 3 years they can get the upgrade of their technology from N-1 to N technology. And in a way, we also use components from products that we get back in our own supply chain. So if you buy a new IBM machine, you can have refurbished parts in it. It's under the terms and condition of the contract that you might have refurbished parts, reused parts. And usually, I think as a client, you shouldn't care as long as you're getting the right performance that you expect. And even fast forward to where we are, because as IBM, I think some of you would know, we are moving away from hardware. So we are going to cloud services. Watson was mentioned with advanced analytics. So we are also moving towards buying the uptime or the certain services around analytics, which also move away from the product itself and moves towards the performance. And that's an essential aspect of circular economy. So the term, I guess, is also not everybody is quite familiar with, even in the Netherlands. Yes, in the Netherlands, they are looking since the last few years more and more into solutions at municipality, but also you see different companies starting to experiment. But it's essentially that model to start moving away from the linear economy we are living in. I mean, especially in construction. And why did we look at construction? Because we started working with electronics. So the Center of Competence of Circular Economy actually looks at solutions to transition industries, companies, but also we look at industry level. How can you shift that? How can you shift that system thinking towards a circular thinking? And that's where actually we were more challenged with construction, because we saw that construction actually about half of materials worldwide are in construction. And still about 50% to 2/3, depending on the country or the regions, are wasted. And that's actually a big opportunity to unlock some value from all this waste that goes to landfill or that goes downcycled. But also, we also looked at it from a perspective that changing requirements. So urbanization was mentioned. And we can look actually at some of the macro trends. So it was mentioned about urbanization. So it's actually really mind-staggering how much that shift is happening. And just to think about that, by 2025, in China, you will have more than 220 cities that have more than 1 million inhabitants. And by 2030, in India, 70% of the cities are still to be built. That gives you an idea of the sheer volume. But not only the volume, if you look at also how much the changing requirements is an important aspect. So if you build today a factory, maybe you need a school after 10 years. How reversible are our buildings? How flexible is our design, the design of our buildings for the future to meet the requirements? I mean, the Chinese employer, before, the whole nature of the economy was based upon the manufacturing aspect. And now they're moving more to higher end services. That's also changing the type of the buildings that you are building. So what do you do with all these concrete that was put? So the urbanization, but also the flexibility in requirements is an important one. New legislation, you see that's also a bit of the red card helping to accelerate the convergence. I will talk about the business benefit. But basically, you see that in the Netherlands, you see initiatives at city level. So Amsterdam is thinking now about being circular by 2050. And 50% of, they would like that buildings by 2030, 50% of materials are coming from reused sources. Now, this has to still be defined further, but at least they're starting to set the targets. Like you have in Oslo also the targets to have electric cars by 2025, which I think is also a very important, it gives a very important sign about the appetite in Norway about such initiatives. So I think it's also interesting to see from the material and waste point of view next to the energy and renewable energy point of view. But you see also your neighbor country, Sweden, is also changing the VAT law for refurbished products. So if you repair or refurbish, you reduce it from 25 to 12% for some parts of the industrial sector. That's also signs of pushing the efforts towards more circular way of thinking. Resource scarcity, I mean, clearly when you are seeing the trend that we talked about in urbanization of how much buildings are being, and the pace of designing and building new construction sites, you see that resource scarcity is definitely a problem. We see that in electronics as well. There is a range of metals which you see that actually you're talking anymore not about hundreds of years, you're talking about 10 to 20 to 30 years. How circular are our systems to try to get back these materials? Pollution and climate change, there's more and more awareness about the link of reuse to the climate change aspect. So we were in Cambridge in the US, we are part of the New Plastics Economy Initiative at that time. And there was the study at that time was announced that by 2050 you will have, in terms of weight, more plastics than fish in the oceans. But also lately, there was also the I don't know if you've seen it, but how these microplastics are starting also to infiltrate the tap water in many countries, which we thought always that it was just clean. So this is the very good evidence of how we lack the system thinking. So we optimized, and when I did my master's in Sweden, it was about supply chain. How can you optimize the take, make, and dispose? So the making mainly about production, centralization of your warehouses. But what happens afterwards, this is where we lack the system thinking in terms of time, but also in terms of who are the stakeholders involved to make sure that these waste becomes nutrients and that doesn't end up hurting us or doesn't end up basically disappearing forever. And this is where the aspect of climate change is present. You see also in the last climate change summit the clear link of CO2 targets and greenhouse targets also to the circular economy. In the sense of in an average industry, when you reuse or refurbish or remanufacture, and there was a study that done at that time in industrial factories in Germany, about 75% to 85% reduction of CO2 or water or energy when you are refurbishing a product or remanufacturing a product in terms comparison to mining new materials to produce a new one. So that's besides the economic benefit, there is also the direct impact on that aspect. So starting with these criteria, we started working towards a solution for the industry. And I mentioned our own electronics work that we've done. But like I said, we started looking at construction, which is largely wasteful. But also, it's an industry which is struggling in terms of margins. So why not also find innovative ways across the value chain of construction to generate more value through a better collaboration? So actually, there are three main things that I will talk about in the next slides, which are important to remember, which we saw in trying to make the case and really transition to a circular model. So the first one is actually data, which I will talk about now, because we realized we are lacking lots of data about what's in our buildings, how is it being used, and what's the status of stuff at the end of usage, after 3 years or 2 years or at any refurbishment event, because people always think that the building is demolished after X amount of years. But they forget there's lots of turnover of stuff throughout its life cycle that could be anything from minor refurbishment to a major renovation, where there are stuff getting out. And this stuff has quite some value. You're talking about, we did a study, and just in the Netherlands, we're talking about more than 2 billion of value of stuff that just goes out, the residual value potential of stuff that just gets out and gets thrown away or gets recycled or downcycled. Because the whole point is the cascaded value, that we want to try to maximize reuse at product or component level before you go to the recycling level. So data is important. Second one is actually the business plan. So we know the studies of McKinsey and Ellen MacArthur talking about the trillions at the industry level, but you have to dig to a particular ecosystem or industry to say, or a company, what does it mean for you to transition to a circular model? And the third one is that the collaboration and creating an ecosystem. We have to be creative in a collaboration, and I will mention a few examples. So I will take you through a couple of concrete examples, because I know also being in construction, it's important to be more concrete, because the concept and the story everybody likes, but they start also saying, okay, so what does it mean for us? So we're working on 2 projects currently, one with the European Commission called Buildings as Material Banks. So how can you enable buildings to become material banks for the future? And that's more a research and innovation project, which has about 15 parties, from research institutes to academia to companies to corporates, where we are looking into how to enable that concept and what is needed to enable that concept. So we are the technology enabler for the proof of concept, but also we are the business model advisor, because you're talking about an industry model innovation. How does that industry innovate to work differently with each other? And the second one is the project with the Royal BAM, largest construction company in the Netherlands. We were working on a reuse platform. How do you enable the matching of supply and demand for the construction industry? How can you enable reuse at scale, that an architect or an engineer, a civil engineer or a mechanical engineer or a project manager, instead of ordering new products, they have visibility on what is available and in which quality stuff is available to get out. So this brings me to this slide, where create a building identity. And you maybe heard, some of you, about the term the passport, the building passport or the product passport. So we found that the foundation challenge, or actually enabler, to start moving towards a circular model is knowing what's in your product, what's in your building. And not only knowing what material, but also the components. How are they connected to each other? How is this light connected to the ceiling? Is it glued? Do I need to destroy it when I want to take it out? Or is it with an easy click system, the modular way that I can take it out and use it? That will be the foundation of the product specification that you would need, but also, so the deconstruction profile and the maintenance history. If I would like to buy it, I would like to know how long has it been used, has it been tested, what was the last maintenance that has been done. So already you see a whole spectrum of data that needs to be collected along the way, from the static data of the product specification from the manufacturer, from the supplier, to how is it connected to its context in the building, to the maintenance history. Already you have 3 different systems. You will connect to the BIM systems, you will connect to asset management system in the building, and you will connect to the manufacturing catalog, which could be online. This is where the integration capability is very important. You don't want to ask people to fill 200 fields, to fill all this information. You want to try to connect as much as possible and automate the collection of this data. And it needs to be trustworthy, because the aim of this is to make the professionals in the industry use it. You can think of eBay, or we have Marktplaats in the Netherlands, or any other of these platforms, or Amazon even. The point, this is more towards the consumer. If you want to create, if you really want to enable and scale up reuse at industry level, you need to replicate the comfort of the buyer, of the buyer being comfortable as if he or she was buying new stuff. So that means they can trust this is the product I'm looking for, this is the quality I can expect, and this is the delivery time, when is it available? So you can start thinking, we started defining 10 product categories in the building. You can think of anything from partitioning walls to cable trays to air conditioning units, or to window frames and the facade element. We define with the product expert what is this minimum relevant data for reuse that needs to be available. We don't want to put more, we don't want to put less, we just want to try to define what is that minimum needed information for the decision maker to buy, to have them available. And we started loading that on the platform. And actually, ultimately, we want to create a passport for the whole building. Because ultimately, we think like a city like Oslo or like Amsterdam or a municipality, why not have it as a requirement that buildings that have to be delivered in the future will have their passport with them, which is the digital identity summarizing how this building is constructed in terms of what's in it, but also how easy to deconstruct and what was the maintenance history throughout the life cycle. And this was the starting point of creating the building identity that we did. But ultimately, I mean, later on you create it with a purpose, because you want to circulate components. You want to start actually creating this marketplace where supply and demand are matched in the right way. And this is where you start engaging the architects, the civil engineers, all types of engineers, project managers, and the contractors with actually the ones providing it, which could be your traditional demolition companies or your waste management companies that are now becoming more urban miners. Or if you see in the Netherlands also, we're starting to see actually new roles of urban miners, of smaller companies harvesting components from buildings and starting to sell them. So you will see new business models starting to emerge. And you see in the green bubbles around some of the benefits we've seen and also some of the pilots. So one of the pilots we're working with, you clearly see there is a reduced purchasing cost. So in that particular example, the second-hand product was 25%, around 25% the price of a new product. But of course, if you don't secure the quality and the reassurance of when can you expect this product, that could outweigh the unit cost. So you want to also provide the information, when is it available, where can I find it? And today we talk to architects who are literally driving with the car outside, trying to find in some of these deserted buildings like a nice window frame or door to be inspired. And when we did some workshops with the architect, we were surprised how many of them actually could be inspired by having second-hand stuff that is available. So that's actually one of the outcomes of the identity of the building. And later on, this is an extension where you start making buildings smarter or even wiser, in the sense of the phases of the building. How can you optimize the use in terms of indoor air quality? Once you know the materials that in it, what's the impact of indoor air quality, the optimal lighting for the usage, but also we have here the automating of the capturing of building data. You can imagine many of the buildings today don't have any BIM models. They don't have information available. So how can you start capturing and automate the capturing of data? And this is where the use of Watson. We have a use case around visual recognition, cognitive visual recognition, where you can start actually automating capturing data about certain products. Once you take a photo and you recognize this is the model of this product, and you can load the manufacturing details in the system without having to manually check what kind of building, what kind of product it is, and without having to spend lots of time around that. So this is an example of kind of reverse engineering, capturing the digital data around the buildings and making it possible. We're also looking at another use case with blockchain. You can expect that to enable also trust across this process I mentioned. This is where also blockchain could be helpful in the sense of making sure that certain events like maintenance or certifications or testing have happened for second-hand products, and you can actually project that at the decision-making point to ensure that the quality is ensured. What was interesting actually along the way when we started this project, that we saw that it actually created an ecosystem around this digital platform. And that's what I was talking about the collaboration and the system thinking that is key to enable circular economy. Of course, you have your construction companies on the far left, upper left side, which were starting to see the benefit for their side in the sense of reduced purchasing cost for their materials and products where relevant, but also they can be supplying some of them. You see the demolition companies becoming urban miners. So you see now a couple of those companies in the Netherlands, they don't want to label themselves as waste management companies. They're starting to label themselves suppliers of materials. You see maintenance is an important one to extend also life cycle of some of these products, and that the data from the maintenance will be also needed to prove how is the status for the product upon buying. Construction suppliers, you're starting to see their supporting performance actually starting to experiment with selling performance. So we are one of the buildings we were also involved partially in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. The supplier provided the Mitsubishi elevator supplier provided vertical transport service. They didn't sell the lift to the building. They sold the vertical transport service, and they're experimenting now with how you can adapt the revenue model and also maintain a certain uptime, of course, of these products. But also, facade suppliers and others are also experimenting with the service model in terms of you are maximizing daylight with these windows. How can you innovate on the type of materials that you maximize daylight, and when there's lots of sun, you can even store the energy inside the windows that you can reuse them afterwards. So these are experiments starting to happen, which also means that the manufacturer keeps ownership of the valuable products and the materials that they can put again in their own usage or somewhere else. Banks and investors, you see that also a bank started to look also as what does it mean for my own clients? How can I adapt if somebody is buying a house and I'm funding that house? If they are investing in a circular building, at least they can, it's a better protection for their investment. Can I adapt the mortgage rate if you buy a circular building? Because that means that also I can ensure that this building in 5 or 10 years has a better chance to be repurposed or reused. Cities and government, like I said, like you see now cities taking initiatives even before the national governments. Amsterdam is taking the lead now on setting circular goals. What does that mean for their buildings, their new tenders for public procurement? This is an important thing also to keep in mind in a city like Oslo as well. Why not include in the tendering, besides the design requirements, also the digital requirement that this data is structured and the data requirements are structured in the right way from the beginning to make sure that you get the most out of the building value later on upon any refurbishment, renovation, or repurposing event. And finally, the architects and the designers, very important starting point with their initial demands and requests. So what was interesting is that you really see here that we're not anymore looking at doing a proof of concept with one-on-one, the traditional value chain between the construction supplier, construction contractor and a supplier, or with a developer or with the architect. So we're sitting now with a digital company like IBM and BAM, but also you're starting to see all kind of unconventional collaboration starting to happen. And this is needed if you really want to make it happen, because it is really a system change. If you don't get the investors, the potential building owners, to understand the value from the beginning, if you don't get the banks or the pension funds who really invest in the beginning in many assets to understand the value out of this, that could be a hinder. But also you need your architects to understand and support that there is potential out of this. You need your construction contractors to see the benefit, that we can also save money and reach our green goals as well. You need your suppliers, construction suppliers, to understand that we can innovate into selling the performance, because if our product is becoming a commodity, we can actually differentiate by ensuring certain performance and keep ownership of materials and reduce our own purchasing costs. Banks did the same things with the innovation, so that was actually one of the outcomes and learnings we are doing along the way throughout this project. So I'm not sure if there are any questions. I have still 1 minute. I can leave the floor open for any questions.
Have any? I have one. First, thank you very much for this presentation. You mentioned as a key this collaboration through the whole value chain. What have you done in the Netherlands to succeed in this collaboration? Do you have some advice for us in Norway?
Yeah, I think it's not easy, because it's really getting out of your comfort zone. You really need somebody to take initially the role of an orchestrator, if you want, or really could see a bit further and could see a bit the benefit and believe in that there is a vision and there's a benefit for the whole system, including themselves. So what we saw within BAM and IBM, we saw that actually we need to just start doing it without necessarily always assessing the business case, that what's in it directly for us. So we both see the benefit for us, but actually we're trying to convince and relay the message that there is benefit also for the bank. I think the only advice is that if you believe in it and you have the mindset, start with one proof of concept with 1 or 2 players. Don't make it too wide like we're doing now with one construction company. And then slowly bring on board with additional use cases, bring on board additional players. So for example, now we're thinking of bringing 1 or 2 construction suppliers without bringing 7. But we need to, who is the forward-looking supplier, which is key. They have to believe in it. If they don't believe, that's not about the size that they are the largest supplier. You need to have somebody who believes in it, and then you can show the success and move forward.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.